I'm Alex, and welcome back to the CIV Podcast.
Oh, this is the part where I introduce myself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, my name is Ryan. Today we have a really special guest, but before we start, pause or maybe pause after I finish talking. But if you haven't watched the first episode, go watch the first episode right
true.
now.
Yes,
before you come back to finish this episode.
And subscribe.
I don't think it'll help you at all, but go watch the first episode first and then come back to this one. So our special guest today, super special. This is Pastor Abraham. He is a pastor here at CIV. We're going to learn a little more about him and his faith journey. But give us a little introduction, Abraham. Who are you? What do you do at this church?
Yeah, me. Who am I? That's a big question.
Yeah.
I'm Abraham. I get to serve here at Church in the Valley. So my official title is Discipleship and Evangelism.
Nice.
That's what I do. And I do a lot of things. Yeah, I like to dabble and do some of the social media stuff, video editing. I get to work with the young adults and their team. And discipleship. That's my thing.
That's his thing.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know you,
Yep.
but we're gonna go a little bit into what each maybe role you do and how what brings you joy when you do these things, obviously you're doing discipleship and how do you get there where you are now,
like pastoring. What brings me joy in pastoring?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. Because I could definitely tell you what doesn't bring me joy in pastoring. I think a lot of pastors could probably relate to that.
Okay.
I won't, but
Save that for another episode.
yeah, I'll say that for another episode where
Stay tuned.
pastors complain or something like that. We'll call it that.
A rant.
Yeah, pastors rant. What brings me joy? I think it's just for me, the big thing for me is seeing people see Jesus. So whether it's for the first time or whether it's for the first time newly seeing Jesus, right? So whether you're totally don't know Jesus or have been kind of wondering or questioning and then you get to really encounter him, or whether you've grown up with Jesus your whole life but you haven't had a genuine, real encounter with Jesus. Whether either of those extremes, I love getting to introduce people to Jesus and the real Jesus and get to see them grow and be man, I didn't know faith could be this awesome or this inspiring, or I didn't know my life could be like this. Seeing people go through that and that experience and people grow is I love that. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's unpack that then, because you talk about growing up with Jesus. So let's dig a little deeper into how that looked like for you, because it brings you so much joy. So what was your upbringing like in terms of your faith, and how did it get to this point where you're now pastoring here at CIV?
Yeah. So I grew up Adventist. That was my upbringing. I grew up Christian. I grew up in the church. Yeah, solid,
Yep.
And my mom grew up Adventist as well. So her family, I think adopted the Adventist faith shortly before she was born. So she grew up in the Adventist church. And then my dad has his whole faith journey too. He did not grow up Adventist, but adopted it on his own in high school, through one of his teachers that taught him. So my dad is you could almost say newer to the faith, where he's growing in his faith, and my mom from the very get-go had been taught the Adventist faith and Christianity and all that. And for me, I grew up in that space where my mom was the spiritual leader of the house, and she was the one leading devotions and prayer, and faithfully prayed for me, and thank the Lord for moms praying for us. You know what I mean? Who knows where I'd be if my mom wasn't praying for me.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, to get to the place where now I'm a pastor of the church, or one of the pastors of the church here at CIV is it's crazy. I never wanted to be a pastor. Was not at all in
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you why? Why were you nah, I'm not even going to
Yeah, why you didn't want to entertain that. So by the time you listen to this, I'll have preached this sermon, but at the end of the month, I'm going to go into that a little bit, talk about my story. but why didn't I want to be a pastor? I really didn't like church that much.
Real, yeah.
Like I grew up in a space where I think like I can't remember. We grew up in this in a similar church. Like you're a lot younger, but I know like Alex's parents growing up, like they were in the same church as my family. We grew up in a Hispanic church, and we were like very traditional, right? Like traditional conservative Hispanic church, and so what that meant was like a lot of rules, right? Within just Adventism, we can tend to be really legalistic. And then as a Hispanic person, it's just like...
Second layer, you just have to add on.
Yes, that other layer, right? Like, and I'm sure you know too, Ryan, like with your family. Like it's very similar, right? Like, yeah, when you grow up in an ethnic household, it's like, there's no mucking around, right? Like it's just, so growing up in a space like that, is like, I don't know, I didn't want to really like care for it, right? And I was a rebellious kid. Like I love to challenge authority. I love to question everything. So when you have people that like really clamp down on you and then you're like, no, I want to pull away from everything, it doesn't really mesh well. And I grew up unfortunately with like people that were abusive spiritually, right? So like, and thankfully my mom and my dad weren't like that. So I had a positive like role models at home. And I think that's what kept me in the church. If I didn't have that at home, I think I'd be gone. But in churches, like I had people that, you know, would like beat you with like Ellen White, like not literally, but like, you know what I mean?
The desired age is just
whipping you,
That's
right?
what it feels like though. It literally feels like you're being slapped in the face by Ellen G. White, even though she's already deceased.
Yeah, right. Like, and she's great. She's got her like her good stuff, right? I have a tenuous relationship with her still. I'm learning to love her a lot more, but I just grew up with people who like didn't really care for context and they just wanted to prove you wrong, or like they wanted to find something that, you know, would dismiss what you were doing or what you were trying to do. And so, not that I didn't have, I was actually thinking about it this week. I had great pastors growing up. Like if I actually genuinely look back, I had fantastic pastors, but they could only do so much. Like as a pastor, you can't control everyone, right? Like as much as I wish sometimes you could control a congregation and be like, okay, just live your life this way and they change, like you can't. And so when you grow up in a system like that and in a church like that, and then you have the figurehead like that, like I didn't like pastors because I'm just like, man, they're just a representative of the rest of the toxic culture of church. So I actually like genuinely just did not like pastors. And when the Lord called me, and was like, yeah, you need to switch into religious studies, because I was in Berman doing biomed at the time. And I was like, no. I was like, what do you mean?
Biomed, really?
Dude, it's always the biomed to religious study, like trope, I swear.
I know.
Actually so, wait, this is news to me. I did not know that.
Biomed,
Wow.
so like you wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah, I wanted to be a pediatrician. So I wanted to work with kids.
Really?
Be a doctor.
Wow.
That's crazy. What year did you switch?
After my first year. So like I went to school like a little later. So I went like I took a year and a half off and did my own thing and stuff like that. And like I was going to pursue that. I actually got accepted into Montemorelos, which is the Adventist University in Mexico. And like their med program is a little different. Like they don't run, from what I understood is like their undergrad is like really integrated. I don't know if it's changed or if I understood it wrong, but from what I got is like their biomed program is integrated. So it's like as soon as you step in, you're like doing stuff, like clinically and in the hospital and like you're working. So that's what I got into. I got accepted, but I didn't end up going for a variety of reasons. And then I went to Berman for biomed, and I did a year there. And I just met like people that showed me church differently, right? So like when I'm in like a church setting that's like toxic, and then you meet people and friends that are not, right? And they have a genuine relationship with God and they're actually pursuing God of their own accord. Like that's what really changed it for me. And that's what drove me to actually pursue a relationship with God to the point where like I was talking to God and having conversations and, you know, you'd talk back. And then that's when he slapped me with that, like, switch to religious studies, right?
That's crazy.
But he never told me to become a pastor, like, not at that first moment.
Okay.
I think I know God is too smart, right? Like, because if he would have told me straight up, like, you need to be a pastor, I would have just been like, no, there's no way.
Right.
I'm not doing it,
Okay.
right? But he said, like, you need to do religious studies. You need to switch as you come into your second year, right? So I did. I wrestled with it that whole summer. Had a stomach ache, and like it wouldn't go away. Like it was just like for the longest time, for like almost a whole summer, I had a stomach ache, and I was praying to God, and I was like, man, like, can you make this go away? Right? Like I'm surrendering my stomach ache to you, and he's just like, yes. Once you switch to religious studies. And I was like, what do you mean? Right? And he's like, yeah, you need to switch to religious studies, and then the stomach ache will go away.
Dang.
And I was like, okay, fine. I was like, I'll do it. And then God's like, it's not real till you tell someone. And I was like, dang. I was like, he knows me. Because he knows I would just say it to go away and then not switch. So then I turned to my sister, who's in the car at the time. And I was talking to God at that moment.
Wow.
And then I just told her, I was like, yo, I think I'm switching to religious studies. And she's like, cool. And then the second I said it, the stomach ache went away.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Did your sister like have a feeling, or had you had like a conversation with her before? Or was it kind of like blindsiding?
Like, did she have a feeling I was going to be a pastor?
Or like, did she know beforehand that you were thinking about switching to religious
No,
studies?
like for me, like I don't know if she ever thought that I might at some point, because I had people in my life that used to say that, like, hey, you should become a pastor, affirming me. But I was just like, nah, you're crazy, right? And I've never had that conversation with my sister before that time. So like, I really do think it was just like, we're literally just sitting in the car, like jamming the tunes, and I'm like, hey, I think I'm gonna switch it to religious studies, like out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere, yeah.
Right? I don't even remember what we were listening to, but
I hope it was Jesus music.
it probably wasn't.
It's a joke.
Yeah, we were bumping something. But
All right, so I don't want to age you at like how long ago was that?
yeah.
Did I ask that?
No, that's all good. That would have been the summer of 2012. So almost 11 years ago.
2012, wow.
What were we
Yeah.
doing in 2012?
I was 12.
You were 12 in 2012?
Yeah, Alex is
I
12.
go with the years.
Alex was born in the year 2000.
That's a song. Jonas Brothers.
Just-
You know that song?
No, I don't.
He's a millennial. He wouldn't know.
Tough.
Because in 2012, I was listening to that. He was definitely changing to religious studies. So
Yeah, I was going through a personal life crisis, and Alex just bopped
I
into
was going through
Time for the
puberty.
Jonas
Brothers.
Oh man, what was I doing in 2012? I don't remember. Wasn't there like
14. Okay.
what was going on in
Let me
2012?
take a look
Coney
at the conversation.
2012? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That was like that president guy from
Yeah,
Africa
in
or
Africa,
something
it was
like
like
What?
You
kidnapping
don't remember
children.
Coney 2012?
No.
Yeah, he was like, it was a whole thing. He was like kidnapping children and making them
Anyways.
child soldiers.
Sidetrack. So after 2012, you switched to your second year, right?
Yeah.
So what
Sorry.
happened next?
How old were you when this?
I would have been 20
Okay.
20?
years old.
That's like
Solid.
yeah. I mean, at 20, like everyone's like trying to figure themselves out, and
Yeah.
like to know that you're like, dang, this is it at age 20, and you're like, you stuck through it, like.
Yeah. Yeah, religious studies, like I had no idea where that was
Yeah.
going, to be completely honest. Like it's not that I switched to religious studies, because a lot of people get that feeling or that call and switch to religious studies. It's like, yeah, I'm feeling called to be a pastor.
Right.
Yeah.
Not me. And I genuinely think it's because God knew I couldn't have handled that call at the moment. He just said, you need to switch to religious studies. And I was like, okay, whatever, I'll do it, but I'm not being a pastor. Like, I don't care what you say, I'm not doing this, right? And I asked him, it's funny because I asked him, I was like, why? Like, why do I need to switch to religious studies? And his answer was not, I need you to become a pastor. His answer was, I need everything you do to revolve around me.
Dang.
And I was just like, what do you mean? Like, I want to become a doctor. That's what I want to do. And he said, no, like everything you need, like everything you do needs to be centered around me. And I told him, well, like, isn't medicine a good pursuit? Like, shouldn't that be something that I pursue wholeheartedly? And he asked me, he's like, why do you want to do medicine? I said, I love helping people, right? And I love kids and I love science. That's like the perfect combo,
Yeah.
right? I want to be a doctor. And he said, no, really, why do you want to do that? I said, what do you mean? Like, I just told you, God,
To be for real.
you know what I mean? I want to pursue this, for X and X reason. And then he called me out and
Classic
he's like,
God.
classic, God
you go.
said, that's not why you want to do it. You want to do it because you want to be financially secure.
Dang, that's yeah. Wow, that's yeah.
And he said, you grew up like struggling as a kid and you never want to face that again. And you know that like, I mean, knowing now, I knew that pastoring was not going to be financial security. I mean, it's not bad, right? But it ain't like the life of
You get
a
free
doctor.
tuition, I
right?
guess. Good tuition to send
Yeah,
your kids.
yeah.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
But yeah, God just said that. He said, you want to be financially secure. That's your real motive. It's not, forget all the other good reasons. The core of it is that you want to control your finances. I said, okay, yeah, you're right. He was right. He's always right. And I said, okay, I'm switching to religious studies, but I'm not going to become a pastor. I don't care what happens. That ain't me.
He's like laughing in your face.
That's not me.
You're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I'm not him. I'm not him, God.
I'll never be him. Yeah.
Here we are, actually.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That's crazy.
So, what would you have told now, like, younger you now?
20-year-old
After
Abraham.
all of that, like,
Yeah, maybe like
not even in that situation, but
Yeah.
maybe like that journey, like going through that process of like schooling and when you first started pastoring and all that.
Yeah.
Or even before then, I don't know.
Yeah. What would I have said to my younger self? Yeah, it depends on what age we're talking about. Like if it was high school, I don't know if I would have listened. That's the thing, right? I don't know if I would have listened to myself.
that's true.
You just said I like to.
I feel
I was
that.
too stubborn.
I feel
challenge
that. I feel that. I
authority.
feel
You know?
that. I feel that.
But if I could speak to my high school self, I would say stop worrying about fitting in. Because I really struggled with that. And like I went to a new high school, a whole new city, and I did everything I could to fit in and not stand out, right? And it's funny because I actually remember that at my school, it was a secular school. Like I didn't go to Adventist or Christian schools. And every morning, I think around like 8 o'clock or something, there was a group of kids that would gather together around the flagpole and hold hands and pray. Like there was like a solid 20 or 30 of them.
Really?
Yeah.
At a public school?
At a public school, right?
Hey,
and these are
hey,
kids
hey.
that like, it's crazy to think about
That is-
because like,
that's
man, in the
crazy.
back, there's a kid smoking weed
Yeah,
and
because
like,
I went to public school for
you
like
know,
a solid couple of years. I didn't see
Yeah,
any
me
of
neither.
that.
I've never seen.
yeah. So that's the strangest thing. And so when I'd walk by them, it
Power
like,
to you, man.
it made me ashamed that I wasn't more like upfront about my faith.
Right.
Yeah.
Like people knew, but it's not something I talked about because it's like you're just trying to fit in. You're trying to keep your head down, survive high school, right? And you do whatever you can. And yeah, I did a lot of things I shouldn't have done just to try to fit in. And I think if I could speak to my high school self, I would have said, like, none of that at the end of the day matters, right? Like, I understand survival is important and it's tough. Like, it's a struggle. But you're going to look back on those days and especially if you're only doing things to fit in, you're not living true to who you are and who you're called to be, then you're going to look back with a lot of regret in your life. So that's what I would have said to my high school self is don't live for everyone else. Live for yourself. And in that more specifically, like live for God, right? And be unapologetic about that. But if I could talk to like myself in that moment of decision, like where I'm kind of switching to religious studies, I think I would have just said, just keep trusting God. Like just keep trusting him. He's got it figured out. Because there's a lot of doubts that come with it, right?
Yeah.
So I would have just said, I probably wouldn't have said too much because I know I couldn't have handled it. But I'd probably just say, just keep trusting God. He's got it figured out.
Yeah. I think a lot of people can resonate with that too, like especially even in I guess like high school, but like we're young adults, and you know I feel like at the age of 20, that's when you were making that big decision, and I think before that's when you were expected to make these big decisions, but now I feel like I'm in my mid 20s and I'm still making those big decisions.
Yeah.
So like the decisions never stop. But that whole thing of just trusting God throughout it all, like we will probably still be making these big decisions like when we're 40, 50, you know, not even just when we're young adults. But I guess that brings me to today. You've obviously like allowed that decision to change your trajectory of your life and just trusted God throughout the whole process. So I guess like in your journey of that decision and through what you experienced through high school, has that kind of interwoven now with your position of discipleship here at CIV?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really has, it's given me different perspective. So what's interesting is, and this is why I say just trust God, he knows what he's doing, is that I don't know what's coming next, right? So I don't know what the next 3 years look like for me. I don't know what the next 5, 7, 10, I don't know what ministry looks like for me in the future. But I do know, or I've come to see now, that every moment that I'm in now has been prepped by the moments previously. So wherever I am now, as long as I'm following God and giving it all, I am standing on top of a mountain of experiences that God has prepped me with to prepare me for the place that he's calling me to. So I know even now, like this discipleship role at CIV, I don't know what it holds for me, but I know that he's prepping me for something else. So whether that's here or somewhere else, I really don't know. I'm going to go wherever he's going to lead, but I know that it's like built on that experience. So as I think about just pastoring in general, I've really lived with the mentality, my entire philosophy of ministry and pastoral ministry has been to be the pastor that I needed when I was younger. That's how I try to live my pastoral ministry. Is I know what I needed when I was young Abraham sitting in church frustrated and upset. And so I want to be the pastor that I would have needed, that had compassion, that didn't, count me out because of the mistakes that I was making, that didn't dismiss me because I was like, man, I did some terrible stuff, like in church, like not even just outside of church. Like, man, my group of friends, we were like rebellious. Like we did stupid stuff in church that affected services. And like we got kicked out of buildings we were renting as a church because of the behaviors, right? So I just think about that, and it's so easy to dismiss kids like that, right? And to think like, man, these kids are going nowhere, like straighten up, smarten up. And it's true, I needed to straighten up and smarten up, but like, look at me now, I'm in a different place. So all those experiences have put me in a place where I can kind of live with compassion for the kids that are in church and that are frustrated and maybe don't really fit in or are feeling ostracized or outcast. And then for those who are coming from outside of church, I know how scary church can be to come back in. So I try to live ministry in a way that really just accepts and welcomes and encourages people to walk with God in patience, knowing that they're going to come with their own stories, with their own baggage, with their own traumas. And I have to walk with them through that process, because that's what kept me in church, is people walking with me, right? And then that all leads me to then discipleship, right? Because when you live in that mindset of how do I live for the person who isn't here yet, or the person who's feeling left out, then that really leads you into two things, discipleship and evangelism. How do you reach the person that is outside, right? Effectively. And then how do you walk with someone to help them grow in Jesus? That's discipleship. So I just know that my experiences have led me to this place where I can take on that role and maybe hopefully bring a new perspective that's going to be a blessing to the church. And then whatever God does in this space for me in this church, whatever experiences I gain, whether it's in this church or a different church, I know God is just setting me up for something else, so that I can live that purpose. Right? I'm always just like proofing. If you ever bake bread, like you got to let the bread just sit till it rises, right? I'm always just proofing. That's it. Till like God gets me to the next stage, till I'm ready to go into the oven and whatever, So yeah, that's what I'd say is like that's what those experiences have done for me, is like get me into that mindset to see church differently and to not be satisfied with, we just need to do church the way we do church. Like, no, there are people that are hurting both inside and outside the church. And if I can be honest too, I know as pastors, like one of our big roles is like to reach people outside of the church. And I love people outside of the church. But as a kid that grew up inside the church and was hurting the whole time and didn't find that space, like I have a special place in my heart for those kids that are in church and still don't know Jesus, which is tragic, right? That grow up in their, like kids' school, kids' classes, that grow up listening to the sermons, that grow up singing along with the songs, and still have never encountered Jesus. So that's always for me is a special target. How do I reach those kids and actually nurture them so they become full-fledged disciples of Jesus, especially when they don't get it at school or at home or even in church sometimes, right? So.
Well, thank you. I had a question though when you were telling us about that story about when God was talking to you, and like in your mind, like I'm not trying to like minimize anything, but you were like adamant that was God talking to you.
100%.
Hey, so how do you think, like, because I know God talks to us in like very different ways. How did you realize when that was like, this is how he was talking to you, or in that sense, like those type of signs, you know what I mean? Because for me personally, like, I'm trying to be more open to those type of signs, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe for people out there who are like, how do you know when God is like, he's the one talking to you, and it's not just like sometimes you just subconsciously just telling yourself, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I often tell people, because a lot of people ask that same question, like, how do you know it's God speaking? Or how do I know, how do I train myself to hear God? You really hear God the most, the more you practice listening to God. And that sounds kind of like, well, how do I even listen? How do I even hear for God, right? I always compare it to, again, the perfect analogy is always relationship with God, because that's what God wants with us, is relationship. So, for example, my wife and we've been married for 5 years, right? And if she's out in a crowd and laughing, I instantly pick it up, and I know that it's her, because I have an intimacy with my wife, right? I understand her. Like, I spend a lot of time with her. I know what she sounds like. But you go back to 5 years before we even met, for example, and Alyssa laughs in the crowd, I won't know who she is, right? I won't pick her up. I won't isolate her. It's just another laugh in the crowd, right? I might not even register it because there's no relationship, right? But now that we do have an intimate relationship, now that we do know each other personally and have walked together for such a long time, we've been together like almost 8 years, I think. Yeah, 8 years, and married for 5. I know her pretty well. And that helps me recognize when she's speaking. And it's the same with God. You're not going to hear him magically, like one day wake up. I mean, some people do, right? But I find that for me, it wasn't a case where one day I just decided, God, I'm committed. And God's like, I'm so glad I was waiting for you the whole time, right? It came after a lot of struggle, a lot of relationship, a lot of devotional time, a lot of praying. And I just started to hear God more clearly. And it felt like, yeah, I can tell this is him. And it wasn't, I always joke about this, it wasn't Morgan Freeman's voice in my head, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't this crazy, you know, like David Attenborough or some like beautiful, like melodic, deep voice that narrates my life. It literally just sounds like me. Like, it's my own voice in my head, but how do I differentiate when it's just me thinking my thoughts versus God thinking or communicating to me? I gauge it by how much it sounds like me or not, right? So I know that I'm naturally not necessarily optimistic. I know that I'm naturally pessimistic. I know that I'm hard on myself. I know that sometimes I can be lazy and I don't want to do the difficult thing. I don't want to be the extrovert because I'm an introvert. I don't want to push that way. I don't want to reach out to people because it's easy to just stick in my friend circle and my close family and just do me, right? But when that voice says, go reach out to that person, believe me, that ain't me, right? I ain't thinking in my head, I need to go connect with that person. I need to put myself out there, right? And so I think of it's 3 things that I look for. One, does it align with God's word, right? So is it in line with what the Bible says? And again, you're not going to know that until you actually study. So you got to study the Bible. So I look for that. 2, is it loving? Does the thing that I hear, like, does it lead me to love better, right? If it, for example, like reaching out to someone or connecting with someone, even though it pushes me, it's loving for that person. It's that connection that person needs. And then 3, this is the key for me, is it selfless? Because I will not ask myself to be selfless. That's not my natural inclination.
That's very true, yeah.
Right? So often what God has me do, because this is me and it's going to be different for other people, maybe you're just naturally better at it than I am. But for me, I know I'm not naturally selfless, right?
I think that's a human tendency, honestly.
Yeah.
I feel like,
Yeah, to think of like...
I relate in the sense of like, obviously, when I'm thinking of something and it's going to like make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, it
Yeah.
probably is God telling me, do it. Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
if it,
Yeah.
and if you're right, if it aligns with the things that the Bible says, and if it is loving, I
Yeah.
think it's a human tendency.
For sure.
I think
To be a little bit like
selfish.
guarded or like
Comfortable.
Comfortable.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. We always look for being comfortable.
Yeah.
And when it pushes me, it really makes me think, okay, that's probably God. But here's the other thing too, is that the more you respond positively, the more you recognize that it's God. Right? So now it almost becomes like certain things become second nature for me, where like when I hear that voice or that I feel that inclination, go reach or talk or do or something, I don't have to sit there and debate, is this God? Like in some of those cases, I've responded enough to be like, I know this is God. I got to do it. Right? So it's that really helps a lot. To align with God's word. Is it loving? Loving towards others, and then is it selfless? Does it push me out of my comfort zone and make me a little bit uncomfortable? And often the case, it's like, yeah, God is trying to grow me and push me, and that makes me uncomfortable. So it's probably God, right? And like in that scenario, like I did not want to be a pastor. I did not want to go into religious studies, but I had been in dialogue with God so much in little things that when it comes to that big moment, and that crucial, that crossroad, I'm ready to hear His voice, right? So I think God is easy on us, right? He starts us small, and it's like, can I trust you with this tiny thing? And then the more we respond positively and actually like follow through in what He calls us to do, then He's like, okay, here's the big challenge, and you're like, no, God, I don't want to do it. You know what I mean?
Like, take it back.
Yeah. I regret every decision I've made with you, you know. But that's the beauty of like of following God, is that the more you're with Him, the more you recognize Him. And then it just becomes easier.
Right. Just
Right.
natural.
But it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. Like, I don't know if it's cool, but I think it's like super humanizing hearing, like you as a pastor and hearing like all of the struggles that you've had. I think like when I was little and when I was growing up, like I would see these pastors and I'd be like, oh, they're perfect people. Like we put these pastors on a pedestal, and because they speak nice words and they say good things, one day out of the week that you see them, like they're just automatically these good people. But I think we forget a lot that pastors are humans.
Yeah.
And that they have shortcomings and downfalls, and that they experience the same faith journeys that we do because we serve the same God. So I guess in terms of that, what kind of, or like what are the issues or the hard things that you've seen in your ministry, and what are sort of the things that you deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, what are the hard things?
So this is a rant session.
This is a rant
That's
session.
a rant session.
But like hard things in terms of like your ministry and
Yeah.
like things like that.
Yeah. This is a joke I always have. I always say pastoring would be super easy if it wasn't for other people. Right? Because people are difficult. Right? If it was just me and God.
You don't even have to be a pastor, like in general.
In general, life is more difficult with people, right?
That's true.
But that's the beauty of relationship too, is that life is also more beautiful with other people. Right? Like life is made better in the presence of community.
Yeah.
But it also makes it difficult because you've got a million people and a million, experiences, and we all clash sometimes, right? So that can for sure be difficult. But I think if I can just narrow it down, because I think any pastor can relate to that. Yeah, it's difficult dealing with difficult people on board meetings or difficult people in church, and people want to complain about a million things, right? And there's nothing you can ever do that's ever good enough for everybody, right? So yeah, I think we all know those things. But I think what a lot of people might not know is how lonely pastoring can be. And like you said, when you grow up seeing pastors, you just assume that they have it figured out. And so what ends up happening is that whether it's intentional or not, sometimes we can put pastors on a pedestal, right? And not just like look up to them, but we also treat them with like certain level of distance.
Yeah.
Where like we don't check up on them. We forget that they're real people that hurt. And when you say those rude comments, it's not just you complaining to like the leader. Like it's hard not to take rude things personally.
Yeah.
Right? And I've had, and thankfully it hasn't happened here at this church yet, because I'm sure it happens. It's bound to happen. But I've had people that have come up to me and like frustrations, you know, and want to meet and sit down and hash it out. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's meet and talk. And I'm hoping for healthy dialogue. And it's just an hour-long session of them ripping into me, right? And it's like, you don't know what that does to a person, like their psyche, their emotions.
Because that's not a conversation.
That's not a conversation, right? Like you just want to rip a person apart for whatever. And whether or not some of your comments have merit is irrelevant, right? The way you do it, how you say it, your intentions behind, like we cut, like it cuts deep and we bleed, right? Like as pastors. And like, I'll just say this too, because like it's difficult being a pastor because it's lonely. And part of that is because you are in a position of leadership and because you are held to a higher standard, there's a certain level of guardedness that as pastors we have to have. Because I can never fully be 100% myself with people sometimes. Because I never know if the thing I say or the joke I make or whatever is going to turn around to bite me.
Twisted, yeah.
Right? Or get twisted. Or someone's going to say something differently. So that means that a lot of the friendships that we have, and it's rare to find genuine people that as pastors you can sit with and just be totally real with. That's tough. So when you don't have people that you can do that with, like that's isolating. And in a church like ours, where we have like, on a good day, we have like 600 right now in attendance, right? Like imagine being the person that everybody looks to for help and support and advice, but nobody ever supports. So, and you're carrying, thankfully we have a big team, right? We have like 4 other pastors. So it's not like I have to carry 600 people, but when you're carrying the weight of a lot of people's issues and baggages and counseling and whatever, but nobody's carrying your weight, it's like, that's just another thing you got to do, right? And so, again, just in the sake of honesty, because I like to be honest, like right now I'm in a season of depression and anxiety. Like I'm struggling personally. And loneliness is playing a big role in that, right? So that's one of the hardships for pastoring is like, who calls Abraham and is like, hey man, like how you doing? Like, is your heart okay, right? Who calls Abraham and says like, hey, I was thinking about you today and like, can I take you out? Just appreciate you. Or you want to go hang out, right? Like who does that? We don't often think about that because we have our circles, right? Most pastors, they come into a community and they're not a part of that community. They likely didn't grow up there. And so that means that everybody's in their circles, everybody's in their cliques, and they worry about themselves and their friends and they connect. And that means that the pastor is often the most connected and the most isolated because they never fit in anywhere, right? They rarely fit into their circles. And then, so that means nobody checks up on them, right? So if you're listening, check up on your pastors.
Check up on your pastor.
You know what I mean? Set up a gift basket, set up a gift card, do something. Babysit their kids so they can have a date. I don't know, right? Do something.
No, but it's true. I mean, we do put a lot of like, we want to seek our own help, you know, somewhere, but who's helping those who are helping us? You know? Yeah. That's the toughest part, I would say, right? And then, like, you get a lot of like spiritual flack too, right? So I know that, like, for me, I've always struggled with depression, like here and there. I've struggled with anxiety in the past, right? But I know that part of this is also a spiritual attack, right? So like all of you ask like any of our pastors and they're all going through something right now. Like it's been a tough year. And I think it's because like we're getting ready to move for the kingdom. And when we get ready to move for God, like the devil comes hard because he wants to stop us in our tracks, right? So I remember it's funny because I was thinking about it and like I was doing fine. Like I was just thriving. And I was looking around at all the pastors and I was like, man, like I can see it. It's coming. Everybody's just getting hit one after the other, right? I was like, I wonder what's going to come my way. And it's like, boom, depression and anxiety. And I'm like, dang. You're like, I wonder what's coming.
Right?
Yeah. You asked for it.
I didn't ask for it, but I was just like, what's going to happen to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I hope it's not something like, you know, marriage failure or something, because that happens a lot in pastoral ministry too, right? I was like, I pray it's not that. But for me, it hit me with depression, anxiety. Like it came back up after I've struggled with in the past. And like it's just, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's difficult, right? So it's really tough, and it can be isolating. And so, yeah, that's what I was going with, is that like a lot of the stuff that we're feeling is not just individual, emotional, and physical. It's also tied spiritually.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're like really feeling all of it, the wholeness of an attack, or the wholeness of brokenness and loneliness, like that's what it carries, a heavier weight, right? Than that. So, yeah.
So a question for you, when you were first starting off, like with ministry, like first sent out to the first church you were doing, how have you seen yourself change from now, like when you first were put in?
Yeah. How have I grown as a pastor? Yeah, I'm a lot more patient than I used to be. And I remember when I first started ministry, I had a ton of ideas. And not all of them were good, but a lot of them, I think, in my opinion, were
like,
good.
I ate.
Right? Yeah, like there were some good ideas, right? Yeah. I had a lot of great ideas, I think, to like change ministry and change church. But I really learned quickly that you cannot force people to change. And so what ended up happening is that I tried to implement all of these big ideas, and I met resistance everywhere. And then I had to really step back and be like, okay, I'm not doing any of it. And then 3 years down the road, people are coming up and be like, hey, what about this idea? And I'm like, I mean, praise the Lord, he taught me patience by that time, right? Or at least enough. But I was just sitting there in my head. I was like, I came to you with that 3 years ago. We could have been doing this whole time. But what the Lord said through me was, praise the Lord, let's pursue that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think like from the very beginning to now, it's been a lot of patience with people to know that, you have to walk with people as opposed to just leading them. Yeah, I can't remember who said this, but if you're leading people and no one's following, you're not leading, you're just on a walk.
Oh, dang.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're walking and nobody's following you because you haven't built that trust, you haven't earned that relationship, then you're not leading, you're just out walking.
It's crazy.
Right. So that's one of my biggest lessons growing up in ministry, or growing in ministry, was to have patience with people and to just like walk with them through it. And if that means that it takes us longer to get to the place where I think we need to go, or if that means we need to make a few more mistakes down the road that we could have prevented, that's fine. Because at the end of the day, like, I might not be here forever. It's that community's church. So we need to walk with the community to get them ready. Because if I leave and everything was driven by me, it all falls apart. Right? Which is mistakes I've made too. So but that's a good lesson, I think, for anyone in leadership. Right? Is that you can't just drag people along. You have to encourage them. And that's what sustainable leadership is going to, that's how you create sustainable leadership in church.
Yeah. So you're like, I don't know, we all know this. I don't know why I'm saying it like you guys haven't heard of it. I'm a teacher, right?
Yes.
So
surprise, shouty.
Surprise.
Shout out to Fraser.
Yeah.
Oh, shout out Fraser. Ooh.
Yes.
But like I resonate a lot with what you talk about leadership and working with people as a teacher. And I think like, especially a teacher and a pastor in an SDA or an Adventist or a Christian setting, like, this is not a job that you willingly choose.
Yes.
It chooses you. Yeah.
Every single day I'm like, oh wow, like I was called to this.
Yes.
Like there's no way that I would have chosen this if I knew this is what it would be like.
Yeah.
And I think like from what it sounds like, it's probably the same thing for you.
Yes.
Like this is like called work. Like we're literally called to be in these positions. 'Cause it's tough. It's so tough out here. Like it's so tough. But I think at the end of the day, like the amount of work that we're putting in is worth more than what we think. And like we will have people coming back to us after all these years, like saying how much of an impact we had and how much of God they saw through us because of what we were called to do in this line of work, right? So I mean, I guess that leads me to like now, though there are going to be people in the future, but what does your future look like? Like in terms of like what changes are going to happen. I know you don't know what that looks like, but I know we all have goals, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, that's hard for me to say now, because so at my last church that I was at in Kelowna, I was there for 7 going on 8 years.
Dang.
And I genuinely thought I was going to be there for the rest of my ministry. Like, I had no plans to go anywhere. I really did think this is the place God has called me to for the rest of my life. Like, for all of ministry, I'll probably retire here, like, just do that. And out of nowhere, God's like, I have you for CIV. And I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't want to come.
Why didn't you want to go?
That's a whole different story.
Okay.
We could talk about
Don't
that if
worry,
you
we
want.
won't
but-
Abraham part 2.
Yeah, but I just didn't, like, I was so comfortable where I was. We had such a great friend circle and good church, and like we were starting to go in the direction that I think we needed to go, and I was starting to get enough of a grasp on ministry that I'm like, okay, I can see good change and positive change, and we can make an impact and grow the church. And then God's like, you need to go. We're calling you for something else. And I'm like, what the heck? So it's tough to say, like, what do I see in the next 5 years or even 10? Honestly, I have no clue. I know what I see next summer. I'll graduate with my master's in pastoral ministry. That's it. That's my goal. Right?
Go.
And then whether I pursue a PhD or a doctorate or something, I don't know. I love to teach. So there's a part of me that hopes someday I can like become a professor. A big goal of mine, and I have it written on my notes somewhere. I have a whole bucket list of things.
Nice.
A goal of mine in my bucket list is to be an expert in one thing. You know, in like in interviews and like news shows or something, they have like, you know, this is the expert in their field on this thing. I want to be that someday, to be like an expert in
Wow,
something.
yeah.
Right.
So like,
I can say maybe like I don't want to say, but public speaking, you know.
okay,
You. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I
just
appreciate
putting
that.
it out there.
Yeah.
That's what I see.
So
No, you say you're introvert, but you know how to grab people like when you're talking.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So.
Appreciate that. Yeah, so like teaching something, right? So, and that's part of why I want to be an expert, is not just like to say I'm an expert. It's like I want to be able to pass on that knowledge, right? To know like I can speak with authority in this area because like I'm an expert. And I can teach you and help you grow as a person, right? Because I had people that invested in me and helped me see things differently. And my professors in university were like just like blowing my mind all the time with God and the Bible and stuff. So part of me wants to do that. And that's what I try to do from the pulpit, like as I preach, is to like present things differently and show people something new. So I don't know, like that's a goal. But I also really love ministry. Like I also really love just being in the local church and impacting like lives here, right? So for me, that's my struggle. Is like, do I go to a classroom and like train the new leaders and the ones that are going to have a direct impact right now? Or do I stay in a local church and train new leaders that are going to have a direct impact now and later, right? Like they're both, I think, these beautiful callings that God has placed a desire in my heart for, but I don't know. I'm really, really honestly just waiting on God. And I'm kind of just sitting in like, I am here right now, God, and I'm not moving till you say I got to move.
Yeah.
And when he says it's time to wherever, I'll probably kick and scream like I do every time, but I'll go. You know what I mean?
Okay, fine.
Yeah, fine. Okay,
Dragging your
yeah.
feet.
Gotta wrestle. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. No, but that's good. I mean, thank you. I appreciate you opening and being honest, because I know it's hard. It's really hard, especially like, you know, pastors, like Ryan mentioned, it's very easy to just be like, they got it figured out because they know the Bible more than I do. So they know more God, but it's hard to be vulnerable, and we all go through our own struggles. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's easy to think that like pastors have it all figured out, right? Especially when it comes to God, when it comes to the Bible. And like I'm always honest about it, but like I definitely don't have everything figured out. Like there are things that I have questions like for days on. And there are things I just don't understand. I don't get it. I believe it through faith because I've seen enough evidence to be like, I believe this. But there are some things I'm just like, I don't totally get it. Right? And that's okay. Right? That's okay to like not understand intellectually, which is a struggle of mine because I love to understand things intellectually. I love to have a grasp on things. But there are things that just like blow my mind, and God's like, that's not for you to understand right now. And I just have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, we definitely do not know it all.
Yeah.
Right? 100%. I do not have it all figured out. It looks like it sometimes. And maybe it doesn't. I don't know how people think about me, but if it looks like I have it figured out, I promise you I don't.
Yeah.
Probably the Lulu pants. That's probably it.
Yeah, it's the Lululemon pants. Right?
He's got it figured out.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
True. It's always a Lulu. But yeah, I think even like when it comes to like being as a pastor in your position of position of spirituality in the church, it's like, oh, they must be so right with God because they're pastors. And then that further isolates you guys, right? Because it's like, oh, they must be so right with God. Like I can't hang out with them. Like,
yeah,
I'm not good enough to hang out with these pastors because they're so they're so godly or whatever, right? But yeah, we forget you guys have questions and you guys are still figuring it out.
Which I like also like that new role that you've gotten to, because I feel like discipleship and leadership, like you don't have to have the title as pastor to be like that connection with God, you know, like, and I think that's also nice that you can mentor people. Like you don't have to necessarily be preaching in the pulpit all the time to be, you know, changing lives too. Like I when you're saying, when you first started off, you're telling us how you had good pastors, like, you know, and people along your way that veered you to like the paths that you were on. And I've been watching this show. It's called Boy Meets World.
Solid show.
Yeah, it's a good show.
Solid
but
show.
like the one thing that they keep saying, I don't know if you know Mr. Feeney, but anyways, he people change people, and I think like, and I'm realizing too that there's a little bit like of God in some people, you know what I mean? And people are put in our paths or sometimes situations, and you know, that are going to lead us in different ways. And it's not to say like also just stops at pastors. It starts with people around us, our friends, our community, and like obviously it has to come from a genuine place, and it can't just be like anybody off this, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's nice to know that like we can also be those people for other people as well.
And like that's the goal of discipleship, right? Is to train and equip and mentor people into that space where they're not just relying on a pastor, where it's not just a single person on the stage, right? Where they realize that they can have a genuine relationship with God. They can have a dialogue with God. They can fulfill that pastoral role, right? And like, so essentially my job is really to work me out of a job, right? Where like discipleship and evangelism becomes such a norm of the individual and the community life that I don't need to take charge of that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And like that's what I love about that role too, is that everyone does have an impact, right? And you don't have to be on stage or highly visible to do that. If you change one person's life, that, like for me, that's enough, right? If I can literally, if all I ever get at the end of the day, and like, you know, God talks to me is like, you know, I ask him like, hey, how was my ministry? What impact did I have? And he said, you know what? You just got one. Like, yeah, that sucks. But like, that's fine. Right? Because I don't know, like, what if I wasn't in it? Would that person have been saved? Could he have been saved any other way? I think God can do it. But a lot of the times God calls us because we are unique individuals and because we bring something to the table that if we are not present at the table, something is lost, right? God can do anything.
Right.
God could work the whole thing without us if he really wanted to.
Yep.
But he wants us a part of it. And when we're not there, there's something missing, right? So, yeah, I love that. That's my encouragement to everybody is like, pursue that. Because you can have a positive impact for the kingdom. Big or small, it really doesn't matter. It's still an impact for the kingdom, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Is there any last final maybe advice you can give us before we close off?
Yeah, it's like if there is somebody out there, and I guess us who want to start getting into discipleship, either here at CIV or in their local church, like what would be their first steps, or what are some tips that you can give them? Yeah,
I think the greatest advice I could give is start somewhere. So you don't have to have the Bible figured out.
Right.
You don't have to go through 4 years of an undergrad in religious studies to do it. You don't have to have like some crazy training program and certificate to do it. All discipleship is walking together with people in God. That's it. So be open to God's leading, right? And then walk with someone. And that means walking with someone means that you're there for the highs and the lows. You're there for the moments of, I get it, and clarity and answers, and for the moments of, I don't understand and I'm seriously doubting, right? Like when you walk with people, just do life with someone, but be invested, right? Emotionally invested, and like put your heart into it. And that's discipleship.
Right.
So if you want to get started, just choose to walk with someone, grow together, encourage each other, nurture each other, and do it along with God. Right? And if that means it's as simple as just getting together to read God's word.
Right.
And like maybe you don't have answers. Maybe you have more questions than answers. That's cool. Start there. Start somewhere.
Yeah. Start somewhere. It's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for watching this second episode. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. We hope to interview more pastors real soon. Thank you, Abraham, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being vulnerable with us and for sharing your story with us. This is a reminder to check up on your pastor. If you haven't so already, you can check up on Abraham. His number is... No, I'm just...
Put it down on the screen below.
But
1-800.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. This is good. I mean, see more of us. Expect more of us. So, yeah. And don't forget to love God, love people, and serve the world.
We'll see you guys next episode.
Bye.